As an action researcher, it is vitally important that you remain aware of the impact of research biases on both your continuous improvement work and on the research that you're using to inform your continuous improvement work. In this video, I'm going to take you through some common research biases and give you some tips on how to avoid them. Hi friends, I'm Matthew Courtney and I help schools help kids. And on this channel, we talk all about evidence-informed school improvement. So if you're into that, hit subscribe and come be a part of our community of improvers. So let's get started and let's talk about what research biases are in the first place. Research biases exist when a researcher creates a systematic error that skews the outcome. It's important to remember that research biases are different than things like implicit bias, racial bias, or gender bias that you've probably studied in an equity context. Research biases are really more about the design of a study and the errors that can sometimes happen when we're not paying really close attention to our study design. And those errors skew our outcome. They introduce bias that makes our results a little less reliable. There's 6 common research biases that I want to introduce you to in this video. First up, sampling and selection bias. Sampling and selection bias have to do with how we select students to participate in our action research or continuous improvement projects. We can introduce sampling bias by including only a certain group of individuals, or intentionally omitting a certain group of individuals, or by focusing only on the individuals right in front of us, something that is sometimes called convenience bias. Within the context of action research and school improvement, sampling bias is oftentimes unavoidable. But what we want to ensure is that we are not making intentional decisions that introduce additional bias into the mix. So if you're a classroom teacher, you're probably going to work with the students right in front of you right now. That's convenience bias, and in this case, is unavoidable. But we want to make sure that we're not adding additional bias by only including a certain subset of students within the context of our study. Next up, we have response bias. Response bias most commonly impacts action research projects that focus on interviews, observations, or survey instruments to collect their data. And they're biases that are introduced based on the responses we get from the individuals. Response bias is most commonly introduced by a lack of responses. And so as we're designing and thinking about our action research projects, we want to make sure that we are systematically collecting data from all of the available stakeholders relevant to our question. The more responses we have to our surveys, our interviews, our observations, the more successful our project is going to be, the more reliable it's going to be as we go forward to make decisions. Response biases can also be introduced by behaviors from the researchers themselves. One of the most common forms of response bias that is in response to you as a researcher is acquiescence bias. And this is a type of bias that occurs when a study participant, let's say an interviewee, responds in the way that they think you want them to respond. This is really common in community forums where you have a well-respected community leader kind of at the head table leading that conversation, because community members who want to find themselves in favor with the leader may find themselves the victim of acquiescence bias, where they are acquiescing to the point of view that they think the leader wants to hear. Another common form of response bias is social desirability bias. This is really common when working with adolescents or in really tight-knit, close communities. In social desirability bias, participants may change their answers or responses to a given situation based on what they think the other people around them want them to do. So when we talked about acquiescence bias, we were talking really about the desirability to be aligned with the leadership. In social desirability bias, we're really thinking about my desire to be socially accepted by the people around me. And I might change my answer in order to be more in line with the other people involved in the study. Another related form of bias is interviewer or observer bias. And these are biases that you introduce really through your own behaviors and through the physical representation of your behaviors. In an interview setting, observer bias might be introduced if you're smiling and nodding or frowning at various points during the interview. The respondent might change their behavior or their answers based on your physical presentation. The same is true for observer bias. If you're observing another teacher's classroom and you're smiling or nodding or frowning as that teacher is teaching and delivering instruction, you might be causing that teacher to change consciously or subconsciously their behaviors as they respond to you. So whenever you're doing research focused on interviews or observations, it is very important to maintain a neutral face and neutral body language, a neutral, pleasant tone of voice throughout the whole conversation. Because deviations in that physical presentation, that tone of voice, can change the respondents and change your answers and skew your data. Finally, let's talk about results bias, the scourge of school improvement. Results bias happens when a researcher changes something about their study because they didn't like the results that the original study design got them. This could involve changing statistical methods, kicking some students out of the sample, pulling more students into the sample, rerunning a part of the study, or just changing really anything about the study at all in response to the results. Within an action research setting and within our school improvement context, it is so important that we be willing to face the hard truths of our reality. And that means that sometimes your projects are not going to be very pretty. That means that sometimes your intervention is going to fail, or sometimes you're going to find that your intervention created implicit or racial biases that you didn't intend for them to be there. We have to be willing to face that reality and talk about it in real time in order to make better decisions. So always be truthful and honest with yourself, accept the results of the study, and move forward. That is how we create school improvement. I hope you found some value in this video today. If you did, come be a part of our community of improvers. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any other videos in this action research series. And if you're ready to start your action research journey today, check out my book, Adventures in Action Research, available at www.matthewbcourtney.com/shop.